through Christopher, I felt like this link, this bridge to what was, because Christopher had a great appreciation for the past. I don't know that Christopher would ever be the kind of person, and I don't think this is disrespectful, that would turn around and say, I'm proud of you, Jeff. And I kind of like that. The reason I chose the piano is, let's just say since I started playing it and understanding it in my early teens. I started when I was 8, but I discovered it was a place I could go when life hurts a little bit. My LP and CD collection and a stereo to play them on, because there's no way I could ever be without music. And if I don't have the piano, which I'd love, but if I have to take away one thing, that gives me access to all the amazing music from long ago to current time, because I love things across all genres. That's what feeds my soul and always did.
Hello and welcome back to These Three Things, the podcast that asks which person, place and treasured possession have made a profound impact upon your life and why. My guest today is the film arranger and orchestrator Jeff Atmajian. Born and raised in the city of Fresno in the San Joaquin Valley, California, Jeff began classical piano lessons at the age of 8. By 14, he was writing music, and by 15, he began studying traditional, followed by modern jazz piano. Around this time, he received a composition degree at the California State University of Fresno. And it was at this point that his love for symphonic and chamber music really began to flourish. In 1984, he was accepted into the first year of a special studies program at UCS for film music. And then 2 years later, he met the English orchestrator Christopher Palmer at a film scoring session in LA. And from that contact came the start of what would be a dual life, living and working between Los Angeles and London. Jeff has worked on over 200 films as an orchestrator, and he often conducts as well. Some notable titles include Groundhog Day, The American President, Chocolat, The Sixth Sense, The Dark Knight, Mary Poppins Returns, and the Oscar-winning movie Joker. Those who have worked with and know Jeff personally speak of his monumental talent and list him as one of the world's most prolific A-list orchestrators. Jeff continues to divide his time between his homes in Venice Beach and in London. It is an absolute honor and privilege to have him on These Three Things today. Jeff, thank you for being a guest. I need to start by asking you, as I do all of my guests, how easy was it for you to choose your list?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on your podcast, Deb, and for making it so easy for me with such clear and thoughtful details as to what would be going on. So in that sense, I'm very appreciative to be here. In terms of the list, I gave it some thought. It wasn't a wrench, but it was definitely something that I thought about. And as I imagine pretty much everybody else would say to you, it's the hardest part to choose one person so as not to feel like you've skewed the impact on their life as if it, sort of basically overrides all others. I've chosen somebody that has a more singular role, meaning that I couldn't imagine anybody else having this butterfly effect on my life, despite others in my life possibly being more important and definitely more present. So that was that. And in terms of numbers 2 and 3, I'm going to give a little teaser now and say that they were interchangeable. So I really thought, which one should be 2 and which should be 3? The name I'm mentioning is Christopher Palmer. Christopher, sadly, in January will have been deceased for 30 years. Right. And I met Christopher in Los Angeles by a series of events that led me to be in the place where he was. He was at the time orchestrating the film Three Amigos for the great Elmer Bernstein, who I also got to meet. So how much background do you want about Christopher, or can that come after I tell you about how I met him?
Exactly as you wish. You wish.
Okay. I've chosen him because in meeting him, I'll give the quick version and then give you more detail. In meeting him, it started my life in England. I had never been out of California. At this point, I was 26 years old. This was sort of September-ish of 86. And by me having the courage to approach him and say that I'd heard he used assistants, would he consider me? And him saying, sure, here's a sketch of Elmer's, orchestrate it, bring it back to me before I fly back to London on the end of the week, and we'll see. Thankfully, my work passed his standards, which were very high, by the way, I came to learn. More on that later. And he offered me to come to actually Nuremberg in January of 1987. I'd never been out of California. I had opportunities that my mom, dad, and sister had traveled, but for some reason I hadn't. I scraped together the money, $600 for the Lufthansa flight from LA and to Munich, to Nuremberg via Munich. And he had, in the meantime, sent me 2 large suites, sketches. So this was due to be a recording, quite a significant one, of Miklos Rocha's music. Miklos Rocha was one of the great film composers of the noir era and the golden age, having done everything from El Cid and Ben-Hur to Spellbound and Lost Weekend and so many other amazing films. The last one being Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, which was quite stood out from the others. And some of my teachers at USC were some of these very people that worked in that era, because I was lucky to have still connected to that. So my point is, this all follows a thread of this guy from Fresno suddenly opening to this wider world of the history of film. And in fact, in January, I'm going to be speaking to a big town hall of nearly 2,000 people on the magic of music in the movies that happens in Fresno, in California. So, to get to the point, by Christopher offering me that work and sending me a couple of suites to orchestrate, which was frightening, by the way. Let's just jump into the big leagues. Why Christopher is significant is because I believe, well, first of all, I now split my life between London and Los Angeles, and I have for 37 years. And it has given me a richness in almost every way I could describe. And if I had not met Christopher, I can't really imagine that would have happened. And though my connections into the world of being an orchestrator in film and such were already beginning to burgeon in even before this, I don't know that they would have gone the way they did if this meeting hadn't taken place. And thankfully, I was up to the task. Because through Christopher, I then met, in addition to the great Elmer Bernstein, who was a lovely mentor, I met George Fenton, a British film composer who seemed to need me at a pinch, liked my work, and before you know it, he started getting films in LA. So the English connection brought me back into the Los Angeles world, and according to George, told me years later that I guess I was noticed, with my orchestrations, and that instantly got me involved with the great Mark Shaman, who I've been with for 30 years. And thus my career, and then a year later, James Newton Howard, who I'm still with, and the year after that, British composer Rachel Portman. I bring these up because these were busy, big, wonderful, brilliant, talented people. And I would have never met, I can't imagine I would have met any of them. I may have, but, and the connection, how ironic, going from LA to Europe brought me back to LA via George, and that's really why my career, I believe, took off. James always said there's a lot of luck in a career. James Newton Howard is a towering genius, but I never took what he said lightly, that there are a lot of people out there that are probably brilliant that never get opportunities.
Sure.
And so through Christopher, and Christopher didn't do this for any philanthropic reason. In fact, I want to get to why, I felt also he shaped my musical gifts. But through that meeting, and I realize in a way I'm answering your first question by describing a meeting, if you will, rather than a person. But that was a conduit for a whole life that I have a feeling I might not have. And I have to just interject that when I was young, in my early teens, I got involved in magic simply because my neighbor came back from camp and showed me a silly card trick, and that made me interested. And all the books that I was able to buy, back when you could go to a bookstore on your bicycle and buy books, all came from London. And I remember a song by Chicago, Color My World, that I loved, had a U in the spelling. I feel, maybe because I'm Armenian, I feel there was a hearkening to this beautiful city even before I'd ever known I would come to it.
This is fascinating. I mean, I love how you've gone full circle. You know, you're absolutely right. That one chance meeting through this man has been the catalyst to your fate, and all the doors have opened, and it's come all the way back home. But I would like to know the nature, the personality of the man that was Christopher Palmer. How was he in spirit?
To tell you about his personality, the thing that was most significant was he didn't suffer fools gladly. He was not a, come here, I'll give you a hug, I'll tell you, don't worry if you didn't get this passage quite right. One of the refrains I loved that he would always say would be like, oh, what do you mean you don't know this piece of music? Oh, you Californians, you know. And what would I do? I wouldn't go, Christopher, I'm offended at that. You've hurt my feelings. I would be like, oh, I'm going to go get this. I went to Travis and Emery, this shop that had little scores very cheaply because I had no money then, used scores, and I'd buy the score and I'd buy the album. And Jack and Dorothy Bloomfield, who could also be on this list of significant people, whom I lived with, the older couple, the first 3 years when I would come to England. Jack loved classical music, and we would sometimes sit and listen to things. I met their niece, Fanny Balcom, and she loved music as well. And through that whole family and Christopher, and being in London, I became exposed to even a wider world of all these things. And I think Christopher's singularity of purpose, and maybe, and again, if this is inappropriate, I hope you won't have to feel you edited out, but maybe because he was single, it's like music was everything to him. And I love Duke Ellington, wrote a book, Music is My Mistress, but I also know many musicians, that is their whole life.
Yeah.
And for some, it's an excuse to escape the difficulty of life. Me, I was raised by wonderful parents who've taught me to be highly responsible. So I'm a mix of functional, but yet that kind of introvert that's hidden by my gregariousness at times.
And I love the fact that actually through him, your English family began. And here we are 37 years on, and it has grown exponentially, I imagine. So that life between the West Coast and here in the UK has led to a whole community of art and artists and family and adventure. God rest him and God bless him in heaven. You say 30 years next January?
Thank you. January 22nd, yeah.
How did he pass?
He did die from AIDS at the age
AIDS,
of
I wondered.
Just in his 49th year. There's nothing to read into this because he wasn't a father figure, but my father had died just a few years earlier from diabetes when I was 24. And my dad just died 3 weeks shy of his 49th birthday.
Really?
And Christopher to me represented, I have high standards. I'm sure all my competitors will try and figure out how to skewer me for this, but I like to think that one of the reasons I constantly get hired is I'm very much more into quite a nuance of detail than maybe, no, I shouldn't say others, but let's just say that I might have been if it wasn't kind of, the importance of it wasn't drilled into me. And I believe, my father had beautiful writing and taught me to build things. And I always loved detail and craft. And, my scores, when I was at university in my hometown, my handwriting is fine and normal. But once I got here, some of my handwritten full scores have been published by Oxford University Press of suites that Christopher did of William Walton's music that I wrote out all the scores to. See, what Christopher would do, he would take the very, sometimes not very detailed sketches, whether it's of a film composer or something we tried to reconstruct from a 40s musical, of all of which the music was lost, or a classical piece. And he would write all over the sketch, this should be clarinet 2, this should, and eventually leave more to me. So I kind of got to learn, and he was brilliant. And I wrote out the full scores, and my hand was so neat. And I loved that because just to look at a score and see it written out beautifully. And, we arrangers are often notoriously known for, is that a B natural or an A natural, writing quickly, not writing clearly. And Christopher didn't necessarily guide me in that respect, but I know he appreciated it. And I think the biggest impact he had was he has also written books on poets and one on Bernard Herrmann. To any musicians out there, I have Benny Herrmann's Forsyth orchestration book with a dedication in it to Christopher.
Wow.
Christopher was Benny's orchestrator on Taxi Driver, which was the last film Benny did before he died. He didn't finish it. And so through Christopher, I felt like this link, this bridge to what was, because Christopher had a great appreciation for the past, and to what would become, like I mentioned, how it would open me up to meeting all these people that carried me into the future. And I don't know that Christopher would ever be the kind of person, and I don't think this is disrespectful, that would turn around and say, "I'm proud of you, Jeff." And I kind of like that. He was never unkind to me, but I loved that I remember we were waiting in line once. There was a place that used to be here called Cranks that was a health food shop 30 years ago. We were waiting to go to Jack and Dorothy's. I had met him near Charing Cross that he wanted to take them some nice bread. And the queue, which wouldn't be considered that long to most people, he didn't want to wait any longer. He just put the bread back and said, "We're going." He once took me to his favorite Indian restaurant where they all knew him, and he got annoyed at something and he walked out. So he had that kind of, as a person who's a little bit more of a, dare I say it, a people pleaser or wouldn't want to be rude or out of line.
And where was Christopher from originally in the UK? Do you know where he grew up?
Well, Christopher, I know his mother lived in Norwich. His father was an organist, but I think he was born in London. I knew him the whole time I knew him. He was in Maida Vale on Weimering Road.
Wow.
You know it?
Well, I was living in Maida Vale for 3 years, and it's pretty famous for its music studio, so that would figure.
When I first would come and live with Jack and Dorothy for these short periods of time in 87, 88, 89, till I eventually got my own place here, he'd give me work, and I'd go back and I'd be working in the little room that they had me stay. And I remember the phone would ring. And this is when I was still early on with Christopher and trying to live. And he'd say, "I'm looking at this one you've never written." And he said, no, you don't leave out the second bassoon when the whole orchestra's playing. And I said, "But Christopher, you didn't mark for me to do it," because I was very respectful of all his detailed markings. And he said, "I don't keep a dog and bark." And that was his way of saying, you still have the right or the need to take some initiative. There was no mollycoddling like, "Oh, Jeff, I just thought I'd let you know that if, And I kind of liked that he didn't have to, it didn't bother me. It didn't make me crumple. It just I love this. I felt like he respected me in a weird sort of way by caring enough to talk, to talk freely to me.
Absolutely.
And I am sorry that he hasn't lived to see, just as I'm sorry my father hasn't, or one of my piano teachers, to see where my career has gone, all thanks to all of them.
Yeah, but that's not to say that they can't see you. They're just not, maybe in the next plane they're watching with great pride and great enjoyment.
I have to admit, I every once in a while I look up at my wall of classical scores and hear Christopher's voice saying, "Why haven't you studied those near enough?" Or, when I'm doing an orchestration, I think, what would Christopher do here? Now, that sounds a little bit cliche, cheesy, like I'm saying it, but I don't think it all the time, because I have come to respect my own contribution to all this, which is not insignificant, if I may. But sometimes when I'm not sure, I think, "Oh, I bet Christopher would make this sound amazing." Yeah. So his impact still carries.
Oh, I can sense that and feel that first mentor and all of his character has really sort of instigated not just the path, but for you, as you say, to find and activate your own voice and your own note, as it were, in this world.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm dying to hear where the place is. I've got to ask, where have you chosen? Which special place and why?
Well, was your prescript about the place, a place where you go for solace, or a place that you feel you like to just go to get away or something? Because I'm going to disappoint you and the listeners, and the phrase one trick pony is going to come up because, and this is the thing that's interchangeable with the third, I'm going to say my piano.
That's absolutely your happy place. The place, so I can clarify, is the place where you feel the happiest, where you belong. I mean, if that's in your piano stool, I think that's a perfect match. So tell me a little more about that.
The reason I chose the piano is I realize you probably can tell I'm a bit of an open person. Let's just say since I started playing it and understanding it in my early teens, I started when I was 8, but I discovered it was a place I could go when life hurts a little bit. Cliche, but especially when it came to love and girls. Truth is, I even wrote sad songs when little baby birds died that I tried to rescue. I think my sensitivity to life, that aspect of me, loved being able to sit at the piano, and it still does, and kind of put my emotions out through it. And I admit that if I could play, like some of my great pianistic heroes, I mean, if I could play like Marta Argerich or, any of these people, then I could let out my fiery passions at the piano by playing Chopin preludes, all of them. I can only play a few. So a lot of it is to sit at the piano and just improvise. And I feel it's a way, whatever I'm feeling, I can express. And I feel that music and vibrations, first of all, I feel we all are vibrational beings. And I think the vibrations, particularly of certain harmonies or movements of harmonies, they soothe my soul. I have to admit, and maybe this shows me to be this is the reverse of it. What is it? A fair weather friend? I'm more of a foul weather friend in that if I'm really happy, I don't necessarily go to the piano and write happy songs. It's more when I need solace or just feel like expressing and enjoying life in a certain way.
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry it's not the pub on a Saturday afternoon.
No, it doesn't need to be. Far from it. Far from it. It can be absolutely anywhere where you feel that sense of peace and belonging. And for some people, that's a beach in, remote coasts. And for others, it's their grandmother's sofa. And for you, it's a piano. And what a perfect choice. So you started at 8. By 15, you're learning traditional and then modern jazz piano. And I imagine you have your piano in London and your piano in LA. And what piano do you prefer to play at these days?
Well, if this were number 3, as I said, they're interchangeable, I'd say that the grand piano I have, it's a 6-foot Yamaha, I bought in 1978. We still have the upright piano that I and my sister used to practice on. And I knew at some point I was learning the Rhapsody in Blue to play at a concert, and my piano teacher, then Alan Ray, my first piano teacher, Esther, recommended I maybe go on to a little more advanced teacher, although Esther was brilliant in so many ways. But he said, you really need a grand piano because the extra pedals and all this. And I knew it was time, and my parents were kind enough to not mind putting it in the home. So my dad and I went to a music store. One of my grandmothers, my dad's mother, had died a few years earlier and left me a little bit of money. And I remember my mom worked for Bank of America. My dad had her get 5 $1,000 bills. There are actually $1,000 notes, or there were, back in 1977. And we drove to this music shop and went inside. And we had already gone and seen the piano, and we'd known the man wanted like $5,700 or something like that for it. And I'd looked at it, I played it, it was wonderful. I'd heard it had belonged to a composer in Southern California who didn't really play it much. So it was a little bit, it was just a few years old, which was actually a good thing because the Yamahas were made really nicely then. And my dad walked in without saying a word and slowly laid out 5 $1,000 bills on the piano. And, I'm not saying my dad was a man of drama, but I thought that was so cool.
So cool.
And the man that was sold us the piano, I can't use, I probably could at this day and age, but I won't use the word that my dad described he might have done. I'll just say, my dad noticed the band basically fell over, like with oh my God, cash, in a sense. So sold.
Yeah.
So the piano came into our home in Fresno, and then we moved a couple years later into that home. And I still have that piano. It's in my studio in Venice Beach in LA. My piano tuner technician, Terry Meredith, who's wonderful, has been trying for years, and understandably, and rightfully so, to get me to, this instrument is beautiful, but to maybe go to a little more advanced instrument, considering, who I like, maybe a little bit bigger grand. And I've tried, but like a first love, nothing matches. And I see it starting to show some lack of that beautiful tone that it had more of in the past. But I can't let it go. I just can't. And I so ally it to my dad, and it's sound. So I won't keep going on, but I'll say that when I moved to Los Angeles, the piano, and my dad had died, and my mom thankfully remarried, most wonderful man. So I had two wonderful husbands for 30 years. The piano went to my grandmother's house. And in fact, when Christopher gave me that music to orchestrate, I drove up to Fresno and I sat at that very piano and worked it out. And then I moved to, then I moved the piano down to LA in 85, I think, when I started having my first apartment, or 86. Sorry, I'm not going to be boring about this, but when I moved to London for a couple of years, lock, stock, and barrel, as they say, the piano went back to my grandmother's.
Okay.
And then I came back and found my place in Venice Beach, and the piano finally has been there with me for nearly 30 years. Here in London, I have an upright piano in where I used to live, in my little studio flat in Primrose Hill, and my home here in Belsize Park, I have an upright piano that is a bigger, taller one. And the darn thing will not hold a tune no matter what. But, piano tuner tunes it, and 2 days later, it's a bit of a lemon in that way, but I still love it. And so they're more utilitarian here. And I'd like to tell the readers or the listeners a quick, fun story, if I may.
Yes.
That I saw in The Guardian many years ago when people used to write in with questions. We love Frasier. That elevator in Frasier seems pretty small. How did they get that grand piano up into his apartment? And I remember I wrote in with an answer, and surprisingly, they published it. I still have the paper. But I wrote in to say, well, actually, if you remember season 3, episode this, there was a service elevator that's quite big. So they would have used that. And then I went on to say, however, it's easier to move a grand than an upright, as witnessed by the fact that 5 men had to move my upright up 3 flights of stairs to the top floor. And the amount of swearing that went on is more than I've ever heard. I don't think I'll ever get this piano out. I think I'm just have to break it up for firewood.
Yeah, I love it.
So it's been there for 20 years.
So I'm going to guess that your treasured possession is this piano, or the original one that's now back at your Venice Beach home.
Well, it would have been, yes. But if we move on to the treasured possession, I need to, a la Desert Island Disc, ask if I can take a slight bit of license, because I'm not banished to an island. I'm hoping there might be electricity, and I can take you're going to go,
can.
Really? Seriously? Okay, here we go.
Go for it.
My LP and, yes, CDs. Sorry, everybody, I'm older. My LP and CD collection and a stereo to play them on, because there's no way I could ever be without music. And if I don't have the piano, which I'd love, but if I have to take only one thing, that gives me access to all the amazing music, from long ago to current time, because I love things across all genres to listen to. And that's what feeds my soul and always did.
I think we can safely say, Jeff, that the one in Venice Beach has had too many up and down the states, between grandma's and yours. That needs to retire and sit tight. She's okay. Happy where she is. The one in Belsize Park ain't going anywhere. So I think it's absolutely apt that you take your LPs and your CDs. And I'm with you. Music for me, it's everything. And maybe I can ask you then, of all of the LPs, I know we are definitely veering into Desert Island Disc territory here, but hey, what name me one of your absolute favorites.
First of all, I love that you love and appreciate music and appreciate my joy with it. I get asked this question so often, whether it's films where I worked on or favorites, and it's just so impossible, just like in some ways the person. But I can tell you the first three pieces I ever heard when I started university in LA. And by the way, the first album I ever owned was a Burt Bacharach one. But Appalachian Spring by Aaron Copland, Death and Transfiguration, written at the age of 27 by Richard Strauss, and Mahler's Ninth Symphony. I mean, this is great. Were all, very powerful impacts on me. But I'm going to throw this out. I love Walton's music. I love Vaughan Williams. I could go on and on about them. But the trio from Der Rosenkavalier, I know this sounds hyperbolic and dramatic, and everybody's going to roll their eyes. I swear that one of the first times I listened to it, I almost died.
Really?
Because I couldn't breathe. Because at the trio at the end, aside from the anguish of, all of us who understand life and a love triangle that could never be, to become what it should be. And as you can tell, Death and Transfiguration, Mahler's Ninth, my solace. I mean, I'm Armenian, and I'm not obsessed with death, but I understand the impermanence of life for many reasons. I remember in the trio, it finally resolves to D flat. But you know what it does after that? It pushes forth just a little further to the subdominant, the four chord. And I'm getting chills talking about the release. You feel that when it hit the tonic, that was the release, but that he could push to another one. And I still can see where I was sitting and listening to this back in 1989 in a nearly empty house that a friend was kind enough to let me stay in while I was in between places. A dear friend still. And I stopped breathing. And sadly,
Wow.
as we age, all these things, we get number to, and I don't have the same impact. But it was so beautiful. And in 2024, I can't make, sadly, a reference, which is sad, to what it's like that everybody could relate to. But I'll just say it's perhaps like a physical release and going even further that many of us couples would experience. I guess that's going to get edited out. But I'm sorry, I don't mean that to be rude, but it's just like...
It's not rude.
It's just like, wow, you thought you'd reached the epitome of something, and then I don't know how Strauss did it. And I'm not saying everybody would respond to it, but the horn lines in there, oh, God. So there you go.
I know so many people in Wales that you have to meet that would agree with that music choice. So we'll have to talk further. Absolutely.
I'll have to come out to Wales and say hi to all these people.
My mother being the first. So wonderful choice. I have so enjoyed this. I mean, I have to say that the passion and the enthusiasm and the engagement that you have, not just as a guest and as a speaker, but for your choices, for Christopher Palmer, for your beloved piano stool and piano, both in London and in Venice Beach, and for your LP and CD collection. I mean, this has been a really wonderful and memorable, these three things. I hope you've enjoyed being a guest.
I have very much, I must admit, which must point to how much I love to talk about myself, which I'm embarrassed to say. Though I was not nervous at the start, but I thought, what am I going to say for all this time? But you have been a gracious and an engaging host, and you've been, I feel you've inspired me to feel comfortable speaking freely. Well, I guess everybody will see you have a very bright smile, and that's very disarming is the wrong word. It just makes a person know it's okay to be open. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And that's my whole intention with this podcast is to let the guests go into that emotional archive of their life and remember and thank and offer, a moment of real gratitude certainly to their person, and then introduce the listener to these special places that they may be able to visit, and then ask them the same question, which of these three things would you take with you and give thanks for? So this has been an absolute joy and privilege. Thank you so much for being a guest. I wish you well, and I look forward to meeting you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. So do I, Deb. Thank you very much for everything.
And there we have it. A huge thank you to you, our listener. We are growing our community and kindly ask that you be a valued link in this chain. For these three things to exist and continue, we need you to please press subscribe or follow now. You can do this on your preferred podcast platform. We will keep you updated on all our community news, and you'll be the first to catch all new episodes. A rating or thoughtful review is greatly appreciated and helps others to find our show. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of our treasured community.